Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms, and these are Charter Moms Chats. And it is enrollment season, so this is the time to, maybe if your kids have been learning from home, it's time to like see what the options are for learning on campus. If you're planning ahead for the 2022-23 school year, which I have trouble saying that. I don't know if that's possible, but that's the next school year. But anyway, so if you're planning ahead for the 2022-23 school year, schools of choice are taking applications for that. So if you want to plan ahead. Okay, so we've been updating and resharing our enrollment guide blog post on sachartermoms.com, and the post that we're featuring today is about the Gathering Place, which is a really unique school in San Antonio. They talk about art, we get to talk about social justice, we get to talk about project-based learning, and so we have the founders of, or co-founders of Gathering Place with us. So there's Ryan. Let's see if I point. Yes. Okay. Mirror image. I put it right. Okay. Right. And then we also have Asha. So they're the co-founders, and I met them years ago. They were new to San Antonio, and we walked around the Whitty Museum, and my kids were running and doing their own thing, and I got to geek out on education and get really pumped about what they were building. So I've watched them go through the application process and their like fellowship with Sook and like the whole process. So just really excited that you guys got it off the ground and you have families. And I'm also very excited to get to meet Jay. So Jay Jackson-Castro is the new assistant principal at the Gathering Place. So Jay, I'm so glad that you're part of this conversation as well.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
So, okay, so welcome all y'all. We're gonna jump into the questions. So first question is just to explain the mission and vision of the Gathering Place, because there's probably some folks, on this channel who maybe haven't heard of the Gathering Place before, and it's a really unique school in San Antonio. So describe what the mission and vision are.
So the mission and vision of the Gathering Place, our mission is to nurture and celebrate the inner brilliance of every child. And we self-describe as a school focused on art and social justice through student projects. We are kindergarten through third grade this year. Last year was our first year being open, kindergarten through second grade. And we will continue to add a grade level each year. Our school looks radically different than most elementary schools. First of all, as a project-based school, we of course take literacy and numeracy very important, but we also believe that there's a lot of other skills nowadays that go into giving a child the opportunities to be successful at the things that they're most passionate about and most interested in. Of course, we've talked about art already, which is an underlying principle of our school and vision of our school. But our kids are also learning how to work with power tools and learning how to work with wood and metal and learning how to build actual things that brings ideas to life. Our kids, through their projects, take on challenges that are connected to things that they're passionate about. In our last project cycle, we had a group of third graders that got really interested in chickens. And so they learned how to hatch their own chickens and then learned how to work with saws and drills and built a chicken coop. And so now, about 50 yards that way, there is an active chicken coop with chickens that then our kids are learning how to take care of. And these are skill sets that we believe are really essential to supporting the whole child, that go into what they're able to do, their social emotional development, the skills that they have to bring their ideas into life.
Okay, well, would other team members want to jump in on that, or should I go on to the next question?
I can highlight one of the specifics in there. So our mission is really short. If you were listening closely to what it was, it's to nurture and celebrate the inner brilliance within every child. And it's purposefully short because even though it's short, it is very deep. So one of our beliefs, because all three of us have come from traditional school systems as kids, as teachers, as school leaders, different positions throughout education, is so often the focus is on college. The focus is on specific standardized test scores or SAT scores or ACT scores. Kids are reduced to a data point. So often it is about career, and we often justify school as school is important for something that you're going to do later, instead of actually focusing on like the brilliance of the child today and who they are, and how do we see that inner brilliance within them? How do we nurture that? How do we see our kiddos for the complex beings that they are? And especially taking into account the pandemic, some of the biggest needs that we're seeing, and we have little ones. We've got kinder, first, second, and third this year. Next year, we're going to add on fourth, or we're going to grow into fourth grade. so many of the needs are actually social skills, emotional skills. How do I share an environment with other peers when I've spent the bulk of 2 years with maybe just my family, or maybe with just one caregiver, or maybe just with my neighbors? And so much of the focus is also on who is this child as a whole? How do we best serve them? And how do we honor and see and celebrate what makes that child really great, instead of trying to fit a child into a cookie cutter definition of what we currently deem successful by either the federal or the state definitions that have totally lost that complexity of what it means to be a child and what it means to be a human.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for adding on that. So, the next question I wanted to ask, like, go into more about project-based learning, but Jay, I want to give you a chance. Do you want to comment on sort of mission and vision, or do you want to tackle like the project-based learning type question?
Yeah, let me tackle project-based learning.
Okay.
I got a chance to live this out last year as a teacher at the Gathering Place. I was a teacher for first and second grade. And so going into it, what I really enjoyed the most was learning about it myself. Everything that the kids brought up genuinely in conversation, in research and exploration, I tried it out first. And so I was learning about what mediums can we use to make a mold of the universe, what's best going to be able to survive the longest in the heat, and considering weather and climate and how clay would fare next to Play-Doh. And then we even tried to create our own at some point, and all of the messiness that went along with that. Understanding iterations and how the mistakes, the mess ups are a part of the learning, and actually the most integral parts of the learning. And being able to collaborate, seeing the kids be able to collaborate and have intrinsic motivation on what they're learning, because it's from them, it's their ideas, it's their experiences, it's their world. And we get to see it from their lens for a second, and get to fully embrace that, and then lift it up in a way that is illuminating, lift it up in a way that is encouraging and exciting. And so one of our projects last year was based on equity. It was on equity, fairness, and kindness. And so we had a living definition of what equity was. And so at first it started out sounding a lot like fairness. Well, if one person has it, then another person should have it. Then we read stories that helped to illuminate what exactly we were talking about. What exactly were we looking for in defining equity? So they understood that perspective has a lot to do with what that definition or living definition of equity is. And we practice that in our classroom environment. We had kiddos who used wheelchairs. We had kiddos who needed accessibility in different environments. And so we had to create our classroom environment, our classroom landscape that they helped co-design to make sure that every student was able to access every part of the classroom, whether it was the library, the calming corner, whether that was the circle. And so they kind of actually got a chance to live the definition of equity, live the definition of fairness and kindness, and advocate for each other based on that. So yeah, project-based learning is really close to my heart for that reason. They really get to live out the things that they're intrinsically motivated by, and understand how we can bring those concepts from the real world into their world, into the classroom, and have those lifelong connections.
There were a couple things you mentioned that I think are really interrelated. And one is you talked about the messiness, right? Like, so if they're doing clay and Play-Doh and inventing new recipes or whatever, like, yes, it's going to be messy. And then you also talked about motivation. And I think sometimes those can be in conflict with each other almost. I think back about like when my kids were younger, and I would see things on social media, like on Pinterest or Instagram, and see these like projects, and they look so perfect. And like all the watercolors are in place, and all the twigs are just so, and it creates this unapproachable standard. And I think sometimes then, like, you know, as a mom, like, you give your kid like a bunch of sticks and watercolor and then you see what they come up with it, and it might be a complete mess, but they have lots of energy. But if you're trying to get something that looks like ready for social media, and you try to perfect or correct what the kids are doing, it destroys their motivation. And like, so you kind of can't have it both ways. Like, you know, if it needs to be of their imagination, the adults have to stand back and let it be messy. And I think that's one of the hardest lessons for parents of young children to learn these days, when we feel like we're always being judged, right? So I feel like whatever decision we make about parenting, we're going to be criticized by somebody. And you sort of have to develop a thicker skin, I guess, and just say like, hey, I'm going to hold space for my kids to make mistakes and make things that are messy. And, you know, I'm not going to let the judges on Instagram grade my parenting anymore. So
Yes. The kids are always very proud, and they're happy to explain what that diagonal twig means. And that is not a random dot in the corner. That is a very purposely placed dot. And so anytime there are questions about the messiness, embrace the messiness, have them explain. You'll get to see them light up in a way that you haven't before, because they really are proud of their work, whatever it may be. And that's a part of the joy. That's a part of that brilliance that we're lifting up in every kiddo.
Yeah.
And I think connected to that too, life is messy. Like when you're an adult, it is messy.
Oh yeah.
So often we structure learning in schools. We bring in the worksheets, the textbooks, the 10-question quiz every single Friday. We create these like hypothetical standards and objectives that like don't exist in the real world. And you see that. How many high school students do we have that graduate and they do not thrive post-school? How many kids do we have graduate from college, often bearing enormous loans, and they do not thrive? And that is because the world is messy. It is messy. It is unpredictable. You've got lots of different people with different perspectives, emotions. You want to bring your ideas to life, and that process is inherently messy. And so often our schools that claim they're preparing you for the future are preparing you for a vacuum that only exists inside of schools. And so part of that embracing the messiness is also just embracing the messiness of what it means to be human, to be a very complex human, occupying a planet with other complex humans. And through that, like that is what allows our kiddos to practice relationship skills that we see adults struggle with. And our kids are practicing it every day, and they're struggling with it, but they're struggling with it at age 8 versus at 28 or 48. They're dealing with the messiness of, how do I bring my idea into reality? I have this super cool thought. How do I make it exist in real life? And now they're tasked with actually bringing it to life versus filling out 3 multiple choice questions where you're going to guess C on all of them if you don't know the answer. And so that's part of it too, is like the messiness that we embrace at the gathering place. We believe that that's the messiness of our world. And in that messiness, that is where our kiddos thrive. And that's where they're going to thrive post-school as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, okay, I'm going off script a little bit, but I think like a natural next topic after that is how that relates to the social emotional learning. Cause like I what you're talking about, like letting kids struggle a little bit, and giving them a broader canvas, because that's more like what life is like, right? School can be artificially structured. Like it can be gamified, where there's like a little reward after every corner. Life isn't like that, right? There's nobody, telling you good job on that quiz. Like that's not what adult life is like. So I guess, so can y'all talk about like, this project-based learning and like getting kids in touch with their motivation and their messiness, and like, how that supports their social emotional growth, like especially, given that some of them are transitioning to being in school after having been, at home for, maybe longer than they would have been age-wise, because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I can kick us off and then hand it over. I'm going to actually reverse your question. I think that it begins with social emotional learning. And that is often what we do not prioritize in schools. Again, coming out of like traditional backgrounds, traditional training. Our kiddos right now, to Inga, exactly what you said a moment ago, and especially for us when we've got the little ones, kinder through third, is so many of our kiddos are coming out of spaces where they haven't had an opportunity to socialize with peers. So many of our kiddos are coming from spaces where the only adult that they've been interacting with, practicing norms and boundaries and expectations, is maybe 1, 2, or 3 beloved caregivers who are also raising them. And now all of a sudden they're sharing a space with dozens of kids and dozens of adults. And they're navigating sharing when that looked very different when you were in quarantine in your own home. That is navigating boundaries. That is navigating different sensory needs. How do I share a space when everyone's making a little bit of noise? How do I share a space when everyone's eating foods that have different types of flavors and scents connected to them? And it just goes on and on and on. And that's what we begin with, is identifying feelings, practicing what to do with those feelings. How do you process them? Every feeling, every emotion is valid. And then how you process them and how you respond with those feelings is what determines whether that behavior is pro-social and pro-community, or is it something that might cause conflict or harm. It is practicing community skills. It is practicing friendship skills. And we begin with that because to us, how you are and how you show up emotionally, how safe you are, how able you are to connect to others, that's what then helps support academics. And that helps support project-based learning and big ideas and equity work. But so much of our focus, like it is very visible that kiddos have spent 2 years primarily in quarantine. The behaviors we see, the emotions we see, the social skills we see, or really across all three, what we don't see. And a lot of behaviors that we do see, even though kiddos have grown chronologically, biologically, the time has passed, a lot of what we see socially, emotionally, behaviorally reminds us of what we would see typically within an age group 2 years prior. So prior to the pandemic. And so we're heavily focusing there on supporting our kiddos and like truly seeing where they are. We don't talk about enough is the pandemic is a global trauma. It is a global crisis. And we've normalized it, especially as adults, because we're 2 years in, but it is anything but normal. And it has had a significant impact on the development of children. And so that's where we begin, because everything else will come after, but that is how we meet our kids.
Yeah.
And if you think about at an elementary age, Inga, you said something really important, which is you can sort of navigate the behavior of children with lots of rewards, very little time where kids are actually working together, right? Like in a lot of elementary school spaces, you'll see kids in solo desk. There's not a lot of peer interaction. There's maybe one short recess. And then dialogue throughout the day is oftentimes very structured. So for the next 30 seconds, turn and talk to your partner about what you think the main idea is. Each person should take 15 seconds. When you hear the timer stop and the other person go. And those tools by themselves are not inherently bad, but those are not spaces where social emotional skills are being developed. Children and adults, but children's brains are growing so much more rapidly, learn through social interaction. And so if you have kids operating in silos and independently for most of the day, and you have a very token-based system where you're giving lots of rewards, then the classroom may seem calm. However, the children are not developing those social skills. And you see as kids go into middle school, high school, and Hush's point, and adulthood, where those skills haven't been developed. And then you have people that have a very hard time perspective taking. You have people that have a very hard time knowing how to share. You have people having a very hard time having empathy towards other people's circumstances and not being able to compromise. And it's because those skills don't get developed at this critical time, because it's easier to develop complacency over the complexity of social emotional skill development.
Right, right. Jade, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. One of the integral pieces of our model is our morning circle, which at the very start of every single day, we prioritize social emotional learning, the skills, whether that's how to ask for things, whether that's how to take accountability for your own actions, how to hold your friends and other people in your community accountable in love and in equity. All of these things are being tackled at the kinder, first, second, and third, and next year, fourth grade level. So again, tying into, these are skills that are 100% necessary to be able to live in the world in which we live in a way that is fully acknowledging who each and every individual is, right? Being able to hold each other accountable is a skill that adults are oftentimes learning as they become adults. And we're intentionally practicing, teaching, and experiencing those skills every single morning of every day at the gathering place. And that's how important social emotional learning is. That's how integral it is to our model. And we're getting to see the evidence of that as these kiddos continue to grow along with TGP, and as they move even further, and once they graduate and they go out into the world, and we'll be able to see really healthy, really strong advocates, really great communicators in ways that we haven't seen before. And that's all because of the work that they're doing here and now.
Yeah. Well, I want to look back on something that that Asha said. She talked about, like, having students reflect on whether what they're doing is pro-social and pro-community. And also thinking back about something that Jay, you mentioned, that there was a project about equity, fairness, and kindness. And so I was wondering if y'all could all kind of chime in on that, how, like elaborate more on, talking about social justice and equity. I think sometimes schools shy away from that. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to handle it. Or they feel like they're facing headwinds, because there's like actual legislation, like telling schools to not go there, which like blows my mind. Like, it's like, of course we need to raise kids to be good people, right? Because we want good citizens in the world. So so can y'all talk about like how you do that at gathering place? I think this is something that, to hold up. It's something that defines the gathering place, that y'all are fearless, and that you believe in putting the time and energy into talking with these topics with kids.
I can kick off on that one, because that project was actually brought to our classroom community by our kids. They had recognized in their own locus of control and in their worlds that there was inequity. There were places that weren't accessible to everyone. There were activities that weren't as easy for some as they were for others. And those are like physical examples. But then they also recognized that some kiddos are more comfortable being able to speak up and others aren't. And so what are ways that we can meet halfway? What are ways that we can accommodate each other so that we all have a level playing field? What are ways that we can advocate for each other? If I know that my friend is going to travel to the other side of campus with me, how do I make sure that they're able to do that, whether they are walking alongside me or whether they are on crutches, whether they are in a wheelchair? And it started with that because in our community, we did have such a diverse representation of individuals, cultural backgrounds, physicality, neurodiversity. And so that kind of sparked the conversation. And then that's what birthed the idea to talk about and to address equity at the gathering place. And so they started in their classroom, and then they built to the school, and then they wanted to be able to share that to anyone who was able to listen. And so they made mini plays, like one-act plays where they made props and wrote scripts and created characters with using examples that they practiced every single day, things that would happen every day, and being able to use kind words and what that looks like, what it sounds like, being able to have foresight into planning for multiple individuals, whether they are with being able to communicate. How one of our characters was a representative of another member of our community who was a part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. And so their character kind of hopped along because they were signing. And so that was something that was integral to the kids. And so they actually brought it up, and we took that and ran with it and helped them to dig deeper into those tough subjects.
And I think, Inga, to some of the pieces that you shared, the nuances in your question too, schools are cornerstones within the community. We live in a highly unjust, highly inequitable community. And if we want to see that change, it has to change with schools. It has to change with family homes. It has to change with schools. It has to change within faith centers. It has to change within community centers. It is the work of every cornerstone that makes up a community, and schools are a really important, vital one. And so when schools go hands off, I don't want to do this, this is too scary, the headwinds, but what about the pushback? they are staying complicit within a system that is highly inequitable. And then a second piece, like deeply connected to that, is just like Jay had shared, our kids come to us with these questions. Our kids ask, why did somebody get treated differently? Why did this happen? Oh, I saw this. Oh, my sister said this. My dad said this. And then they're grappling with it because it doesn't quite fit within their worldview. You don't just wake up one day as an adult that is highly prejudiced. That is something that is taught and conditioned within you every single year that you are growing, and it hasn't been addressed. It hasn't been redressed. There hasn't been accountability. There hasn't been healing. And we talk about, like, why is our world so unjust? Like, it doesn't just happen. That's not random. It is work that we have either chosen to not do within ourselves, or it is work that we've chosen to not intervene this progression of continued inequity. And I'll share some examples that I and like a trigger warning on them as well. But we will hear from kids as young as 5. So they're in kindergarten, and they're telling us that they don't like this specific child because of their race. It's kids in kindergarten who are telling us that the person sitting next to them at the table can't do that because that's their gender, and their caregiver told them that the child of that gender shouldn't be doing these types of activities. Like, our kids are saying that to us at age 5, and this is loaded language. This is loaded with racial stereotypes, gender stereotypes, religious stereotypes, and this is coming from kids at age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we'll often hear from caregivers like, I actually, you know what, I don't want my kids to think about this or even deal with this part of the world until, you know what, they're grown up, they're past high school. It happens every single day. And if there are children that are young enough to experience all of that prejudice, then your children definitely have the space to learn about the prejudice that they're often perpetuating. But again, that then prompts conversations at home. So often our kids go home asking big questions of, hey, you said this and this about this type of people, but I don't believe that. And that's coming from a second grader. And those prompt bigger conversations within families. And it is like, that is how you change society, is by diving into those very conversations that most people claim they're afraid to do. Because if they did actually acknowledge them head on, they would have to face how many biases they hold, or how do they benefit from systems of oppression. And so that's often what's at the core. And that's where, like, those headwinds come, or the legislation come. It's because people are afraid of change, because and it's people in power and in privileged positions that are afraid of change. And so we tackle that head on because our kids come to us with those questions. And it is our responsibility as educators to dive into those conversations, not to say, no, not here. We'll talk about this when you're 18.
Right. And to speak to your audience base, we are living in an era and in a state where the work to silence schools is active. There are lawsuits against schools. There are political threats against schools right now, based on the sort of confusing legislature related to what has been coined critical race theory, even though that's not what the bill is actually about, related to the types of books that are in schools. And one of the things that is essential in this fight, and it is a fight, right? Schools are political spaces, is the caregivers out there that understand everything that Asha just said and understands the importance of addressing inequities in schools, need to be ready to make their voices heard. They need to be ready to make their voices heard to their schools, to show solidarity and support in the way in which schools address equity and justice in schools. And they need to be ready to make their voices heard politically when people come after school officials and when people come after ways of running schools. Because at the end of the day, it is the voice of the caregivers and the parents out there that have the most power to say to the people that are pushing back against equity and pushing back against the ideas of social justice being integrated in schools, to change that.
Yeah, and like Ashley said, doing nothing means that you're keeping the equity in the status quo, and that's not okay. And so there's no way to avoid the choice, right? Yeah. Either you do something about it or you don't. And if you don't do something, you're part of the problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I just want to honor you guys for, like, having the tough conversations with kids, because I feel like in the current environment, it's very easy to just tell yourself you can just put it off or avoid it. But the problem's not going to go away unless, like Ryan said, like caregivers, we have a role to play in how we teach our own children and how we push back on what the school systems are doing. So thanks, guys. Okay, so I guess I want to shift it more towards like nuts and bolts type. We're talking about caregivers, like what do they want to know about the gathering place? And I think that like on y'all's website. Oh, let me that's my cue. Put that on screen. So on y'all's website, you have like great infographics, and you talk about like the activities that kids do and like what the daily schedule is like. And we shared some of those in the blog post as well. So, but I was wondering if maybe each of y'all could share an example of like an activity that kids do during the day that you feel like represents like what the gathering place is about.
There's so many options. I'll kick us off.
Okay.
So and there's so much. We have an amazing cooking and gardening program. A part of thinking about the whole child is also thinking about health, and physical health is a part of that. We have a cooking kitchen that resembles Master Chef. We have the most amazing cooking and gardening teacher, Bryant. And so you walk into a classroom where you see 26 kids, making homemade bread and learning how to make homemade tortillas and learning how to garden and then get fruit from that garden or vegetables from that garden and incorporate into a sauce to go with the homemade bread. And understanding food, where food comes from, what it means to eat healthy, how we can be a part of a sustainable ecosystem of food. Is really important for kids. And starting in elementary school, our kids get that experience regularly, and all of our kids get to have that experience.
Yeah, I'll share on a theme that we've already connected on, which is project-based learning. So a good chunk of our day is spent in project-based learning blocks. And so our kiddos are exploring a project cycle. And so throughout multiple weeks, usually around 10 weeks or so, they're diving into a question, a topic, curiosities, passions that the teacher is heavily supporting and guiding it with intentionality and with depth. And what that means is that every single day of PBL actually looks different. And so that looks very, very different than like traditional school where you've got your textbooks, you've got your worksheets, you kind of know that the first 5 minutes goes to this, the next 10 this, the next 10 here, and then we're going to close out with a review question at the end versus a project arcing. And so you're beginning with empathizing and identifying problems and collecting research and then figuring out how do we want to possibly approach this problem and what would we build or create or make or add on to something that already exists. And then you plan out your iterations, you begin building them into reality, then you're refining them, then you're actually showcasing them to the community. So we've had 2 showcases this semester. This year is the first year we've gotten to have them in person because last year we were our events were virtual because it wasn't safe enough to have folks all together. But we're a 7.5 acre campus, 14 buildings. We don't have hallways. We connect through the outside. And so we're able to have our first showcases. So our project-based learning showcase and then our art showcase. And both events had over 800 community guests come out to see the brilliant work that our kids are creating, to see the brilliant work that our teachers are guiding and that our campus is supporting. And so that gives you a little bit of taste of that predictability of every single day is going to look and feel the same. Never exists within a project block because the project is a living, breathing experience that changes as you live through the different phases of a project.
And I can chime in with our arts and wellness classes are very unique. Ryan touched on one of them, which is our nutrition, cooking, and gardening class. We also have visual arts and immersion arts classes, and we also have dance, and we have yoga. All of these are, again, integral to the overall model at the Gathering Place. And we just recently had an art showcase where all of our kiddos got to show the community their amazing artworks and dance performances. And each performance from each class in dance was tied to a community project. So some were a clothing drive, some were food donation drive, some were access to Boysville club, and so like every single aspect of the dance was tied to a community project as well. And so that kind of brought both project and art together in that way. And so that's another example of what happens on a day-to-day. They're working towards their art showcases. And in the actual visual art, there were definitely iterations. There were definitely a process of deciding what pieces to use and what pieces not to use, and what kind of displays were going to work. I mean, these kiddos came out and worked super duper hard. It was an amazing turnout. The community really showed up and showed out for our kiddos, and every single one of them was beaming with pride to showcase the hard work that they've done that was purely birthed from them, from their hearts, from their passions, because every single person is creative. They just need an opportunity to show it. And so they got an opportunity to do that. And it was just a really awesome experience. And so, yes, we had a project showcase and an art showcase, and both were absolutely amazing.
That's beautiful, and how wonderful that they're open to the public too. That and they're outdoors, right? So everyone can gather safely. But but yeah, and I'm sure it felt celebratory after a year of not being able to gather. Yeah, well, those
very
are
much.
Yeah,
gathering place that wasn't able to gather because of a global pandemic.
Yeah. Nature had other plans. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been great to hear from all of y'all about, the things that make the gathering place unique. And I hope that this has, made some more caregivers aware that this option is out there. And I'm hoping that some of them are curious and want to take the next step. Maybe that's a school tour or, submitting an application. So I wonder if y'all can share, some concrete details of those next steps that people can take.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely go take a look at our website, tgpk12.org. Also, thegatheringplaceK12.org. That's a long one. You can go there and apply straight through our website. There's a lot of additional information about the school. You can also use our website to reach out to our front office to set up a school tour. We have weekly school tours. We also have a really active Facebook page where we share. One of the beautiful things about being a very hands-on project-based school is there's a ton of amazing things to share. And so take a look at the different posts. You can get a really great view of what learning at the Gathering Place looks like and sounds like and feels like. And all of those are great opportunities. We are enrolling. We have active spots available this year. We are also enrolling for next year. This year we are kindergarten through third grade. We will obviously be accepting applications kindergarten through fourth grade for next year. So take a look through our website and fill out an application, get a chance to talk to someone on our enrollment team, and get all of your questions answered.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I want to echo what Ryan said about the Gathering Place Facebook page is full of ideas and expression and showing lots of student work and here the students are with tools and here they are in their garden and it gives you a sense of what I haven't been to the campus yet. That I know I had a schedule conflict. But I'm so curious about because I guess for people who've lived in San Antonio for a while, it used to be Apple County Fair, right? And so some people have fond memories of that as a kid. Actually, I moved here as a teenager, and so I actually never went as a kid to Apple County Fair, but I remember hearing about it and hearing the catchy jingles on TV.
Yeah.
But the image I have is just lots of open space, big oak trees, and these buildings where there's cool stuff happening in each building. There's also the open space and room to paint murals and just room for the kids to be themselves.
We had a kid who started with us last week, actually. And after the first week, we asked her what she thought about the school. And she said, it's great. Instead of pretending to be an adult, I get to really be a kid. And I think there was something that was really insightful in that reflection and honest in that reflection that I think also captures both our ethos and our mission.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you all for joining me for this great conversation, and I'm proud to share the word about that. That the Gathering Place is out there, and y'all are offering something distinctly different. But it's a beautiful vision for how to support kids and how to help them become great citizens. Caring, pro-social, pro-community people.
Inga, thank you for making space for this conversation.
Okay, thanks, y'all. Okay,
all right.
bye.